This is over 400k DPS being done with the DE Jaws, and one of my personal favorite weapons that I have been using for quite a while now. And this weapon is extremely strong and very fun to use. I'm very excited to talk about it today. Alright, so before we get into the weapon itself, we're going to go over what is Unstable Bomber. So Unstable Bomber, trigger 1 status damage blast every 100% PSI intensity after 0.1 seconds with a blast radius of 1.5 meters. The damage decays over the explosion distance down to a minimum of 50%. The additional damage is Blast Element, which cannot crit and it cannot strike weak spots. Will not decay if distance. Alright, so the important thing to look at is that this weapon deals status damage, which is going to be that explosion when you trigger Unstable Bomber, and it also benefits from the Blast Element. So this is an elemental weapon that deals status damage. However, the difference between this one and normal elemental weapons is that this weapon can crit. Alright, so getting into the weapon itself, this is where it actually gets really good. So the DE50 Jaws, how does it work? Every 4 hits triggers Unstable Bomber. A critical hit grants +1 to the hit count. So you're basically doubling those hits, so you can technically trigger Unstable Bomber every 2 hits. Hitting a weak spot grants +30% blast damage for 8 seconds. Unstable Bomber can land critical hits with a +25% crit rate. That is the most important thing on this description, is that Unstable Bomber can land crit hits, which completely changes how this weapon is built from the other bomber weapons. Alright, for the mod for this weapon, we are running Reckless Bomber. For every 1% crit rate, Unstable Bomber damage plus 0.5%. So we're already going to be having a ton of crit rate, so this is going to boost our bomber damage even more. And to top all of that off, we are as well running this in an Unstable Bomber affix for even more Unstable Bomber damage. And you can also get Unstable Bomber crit damage. In my case, there's 12% for even more crit damage. Basically, we're stacking so much crit on this weapon, and it's going to do so much damage. Now, another option that you can run for the mod would be the Bombarder Souvenir, which when triggering Unstable Bomber, you automatically refill 10% of your magazine, right? And the only way that this one works is you have to have a minimum of 20 bullets inside your pistol. 20 bullets is the minimum for this mod to work. However, you will never, 99% of the time, never have to reload the weapon, right? And you can also run this one in Unstable Bomber FX, and you can get the crit damage on this as well. This is a little bit less damage than the first one. However, this is a good option if you don't ever want to reload. Alright, for the calibration for this weapon, we are running a rapid shot style calibration, which gives you a fire rate plus 25%, as well as a magazine capacity plus 40%. You will be losing 15% attack. However, the fire rate and the magazine capacity more than make up for that 15% attack loss. And we are running this weapon in a double crit rate because this weapon benefits from the more crit rate that you have, the more damage it will do. So basically, all you want to focus on this weapon is crit rate and crit damage. Alright, so getting the attachments for the weapon, we are running the multi-brake, the compact reflex sight, the small infrared indicator, and the extended pistol magazine, which this part is the biggest part of the attachments. So if you were to change any of these, you can change them, but don't change the extended pistol magazine because you want that extra ammo in this weapon. However, for the ammo, we are using AP tungsten ammo. However, regular tungsten is perfectly fine as well. Alright, for the secondary, we are running the recurve crossbow, which the recurve crossbow, when hitting a weak spot, will inflict the bullseye on the target, causing all weapons to have crit rate of plus 15%, which that's going to benefit the DE Jaws even more because when this weapon has more crit rate, it does even more damage. So you're getting that bullseye debuff and as well getting more crit damage. Alright, for the melee, we're using the Kuriki, which the Kuriki is an interesting weapon. You can only get this weapon from drops, like from silos and monoliths. However, when defeating a target, grants all weapons attack plus 30% and crit rate plus 15% for 10 seconds, which that is enormous. So once you kill an enemy with this weapon, you're getting an additional 30% attack and crit rate plus 15% for 10 seconds. So more attack and more crit rate from this weapon. Alright, so now getting into the armor, we are running a 3-piece Lone Wolf set with a 2-piece Treacherous Tide set. and this set will work for both Novus Manibus and Lunar servers. All right, so the 3-piece lone wolf set at 2 pieces will give you an additional 5% crit rate, and at 3 pieces will get 1 stack of lone wolf with every 2 weapon crit hits. Lone Shadow, crit damage plus 6% for 30 seconds, and the effect can stack up to 8 times. So you're not only getting more crit rate, you're getting an insane amount of extra crit damage with this 3-piece lone wolf set. And to top it off, we are running the 2-piece treacherous tide set. So when HP is below 70%, weapon damage and status damage plus 12%, which this weapon is still a status damage weapon. So now you are boosting the status damage even more. All right, now getting into the mods, and this is where this weapon gets really strong, especially on lunar servers. So we are running Deviation Expert, which would give you additional fire rate plus 10% and status damage plus 20%. Both of those, this weapon benefits from enormously. And on top of that, we are running this in a lunar suffix. For the lower your HP, the higher your status damage, 12% for me. And you also as well can get the lower your HP, the higher your crit damage, which can get up to a huge 30% increase. So that is a whole 30% increase in crit damage and 12% status damage we are getting from this single mod. Now, if you are not inside a Luna server, you can just run it with a violent suffix and you can still get an enormous amount of crit damage on it. All right, again, in the mass mod, we are running Pinpoint Strike. So Pinpoint Strike, when Unstable Bomber hits only one enemy, Unstable Bomber final damage plus 25%. So when you hit only one enemy with Unstable Bomber damage, which you will do most of the time, you will gain an additional 25% extra bomb damage. And on top of that, we are running this in Unstable Bomber Affix, and we are getting Unstable Bomber damage and even more Unstable Bomber crit damage. So this is we're already at an insane amount of crit damage and bomber damage, and it's just gonna get even better after this. All right, after the top mod, we're running Critical Rescue, which damage reduction plus 20% and healing received plus 20% when HP is below 30%. And if you thought we weren't getting enough crit damage already, think again, because now we're getting even more crit damage with our HP being low, and even more status damage for HP being low. I mean, that's so in total, a 60% crit damage and 24% status damage from 2 mods. That's just from 2 mods. That's enormous. And for the pants mod, we are running Deadshot, which Deadshot, each crit hit by non-melee weapons grants plus 5% crit damage up to 45%. This effect is removed upon next reload. I know. You're probably tired of me saying crit. I'm sorry. There's lots of crit going on over here, okay? For the gloves, we are running Crit Amplifier. All right, and this will give you an additional crit rate 10% and crit damage 15%. So now you're getting even more crit rate and crit damage. I feel like I've said that on every single mod, but hey, I mean, that's a good thing, right? All right. And we're also using a violent suffix for crit damage, and we got lucky with this one, and we got weapon damage on top of that as well. And for the boots mod, we are running Rush Hour. So Rush Hour, every 10% HP loss grants plus 4% melee, weapon, and status damage. So we're not worried about the melee damage, but 4% weapon and status damage. So this could technically go up to 40% at max. However, you would be dead at 40% max. So technically, you could actually get up to 36% more weapon and status damage, which is enormous and even more beneficial. We're also running this one in a violent suffix for more crit damage. All right, getting to the key item, we're running the Shaman Vulture Top, which this key armor ties it all together to make it even better. So after trigger Unstable Bomber, your crit rate is going to go up by 35% for 3 seconds. That 3 seconds is basically not even existent because you're going to be triggering Unstable Bomber every single second. So you're going to be getting even more crit rate just for free. This armor makes the pistol so much better. Like in the deviation, we are using the Shadowed Maiden, which is Shadowed Maiden is the best one you can use for Bomber because she will increase your explosive damage. In my case, I have a 4/4 Shadowed Maiden, which is giving me an increase of 70% explosion damage, which is actually enormous and makes your bomb procs skyrocket, like almost double in damage. And she's very useful. Sometimes she doesn't work, sometimes she does. So it's kind of iffy with her. Again, in the food buffs, we are using the whimsical drink for the drink buff, which will give you a 25% status damage bonus, which Bomber is a status damage, so now you are significantly increasing that status damage that you are going to be proccing on enemies. And for the fruit buff, we are running Popcorn, which Popcorn used to increase your unstable bomber damage by 10%, which doesn't sound like a whole lot, but it does increase it quite a bit. If you did not want to run the Popcorn, you could run Surprise Spring Roll, which would give you an increase of elemental damage, 5 to 15%. It's just random, but it does double if your HP is below 40%. So this can potentially be more than the Popcorn, but it's personal preference, either or. This one and the Popcorn both work as long as you have the Whimsical Drink, which is the biggest one. And now getting into the Cradle, we are running Anti-Coherence, Resilience, Tactical Combo, Deviate Energy Defense, Energy Surge. If you were inside a Luna server, you can run this one. Chaotic Thoughts, Explosive Bonus, Status Enhancement, and Elemental Sense. If you don't want to run this one, you could run Chaotic Thoughts instead. Overall, I would say this is one of the funnest builds I've done in a while, and I've actually been planning on making this build for quite a while now, and I'm very glad that I got to make it. I really hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will catch y'all in the next one.